Hello, welcome back. Haven't made a video for a while. I've had COVID. So spring is certainly just around the corner here in Britain. There's all sorts of new sounds, new flowers. Apologies if you can hear the tractor over there beeping. That's not a new sound, that's a very annoying one. But yeah, there's quite a few visitors back on these shores that have been away all over winter. Birds, summer birds. So I wanted to share something a little bit different with you guys today. It's actually a Native American Canadian story from the Innu people of Labrador, Newfoundland kind of area. But this is a type of story that has many different versions across the First Nations and the Native American peoples. I also feel that with a lot of Native American mythology and folklore, there's often a lot of similarities in worldview with Celtic mythology, which is what I usually do. So that's my thought process behind sharing this tale, as well as it being a very seasonal one for this time of year. So here goes. Long ago, long ago, in deep time, in myth time, just on the edge of the dreaming, it was a very long winter. And in a certain village, there was a boy who would not stop crying. His mum and dad, they tried everything to make him stop crying. They had even given him, a nice little roasted caribou heart. They had tried it all. And in the end, the situation was so dire, nobody in the village could even sleep, that they got a congregation of the village elders and magic workers into their little hut to see what the matter could be. And the village elders, they stroked their beards and hummed and hawed and said, there's only one thing for it. Best thing to do is, ask him what's wrong. And the little boy said, birds, I want birds. What, eating type birds, said his mum and dad. No, summer birds. I want summer birds, singing birds, said the little boy. Well, the elders said, best thing to do is to get him some of these summer birds. Second best thing to do, chuck him in the lake and drown him. I can't get any sleep. So his mum and dad, they opted for the first of these two options. They were going to get their boy some summer birds, some singing birds, and see if that would stop his crying. Now, as I said at the beginning of this story, it was in the deep time, the myth time, when humans and animals, they lived together and still spoke the same language. So they gathered a committee of all the best animals, or at least all the ones that were available in winter. And it was these, the A-team, if you like. There was Wolf, right? He was going to be the leader, noble Wolf. There was Porcupine, good, solid character Porcupine, good one to have on your team. There was Otter, really good in a sticky situation, Otter. And there was Muskrat, kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel there, really, the runt of the litter, really, Muskrat, but very few others were available. And they needed a bit of a tricksy figure as well. I guess Wolverine wasn't available at this time, or didn't want to come along, because they settled on Fisher. Fisher, if you live in North America, you probably know what a fisher is, or fisher martin. In this part of the world, it would be maybe a pine martin, or a ferret, or a polecat, sort of a mustelid, a little bit tricksy, you know what I mean? So that was the animals that set out on the quest to find the summer birds. Wolf, porcupine, muskrat, otter, and fisher. Now, they set off in a birchbark canoe by riverways and seaways and coastal ways due south. And eventually they reached the lodge of another animal. This animal was Beaver. Beaver lived sort of at the edge of things, a bit of a liminal creature, Beaver. Now, at Master Beaver's lodge, Master Beaver was very generous. In fact, so generous that he killed and cooked up 2 of his favourite children and served them up to his guests to eat. And they were still hungry, so he cut off a bit of his own fat and fried that up for his guests. Don't quite know the meaning of this part in the story, this sacrificial part. Perhaps you know, let me know in the comments. Anyway, Beaver said, do please move along with your quest, because I can't sleep. That kid won't stop crying. So off they went due south, with Wolf in the prow, rowing in their birchbark canoe, this conglomeration of animals. And eventually they went by riverways to a huge, vast lake right in the middle of the sort of desolate Canadian wilderness. And in the middle of that lake there was an island, and in the middle of that island there was a little log cabin. Now they sort of circled round this island and got closer and closer, and they saw that around that cabin was all sorts of birch bark baskets, and inside those baskets were all the summer birds. So out they disembarked from their canoe, and then out of that little hut came a man. It was the old man who guarded the summer birds, and he had a long white beard and long hair. I sort of imagine him like some sort of Canadian hillbilly, you know, with sort of dungarees and like a hat, and because, you know, time is non-linear in the mythic. And this old keeper of the summer birds comes out of his hut and says, "Now, what's all this about?" I apologise now for my Canadian accent. In fact, I'll probably leave it there. He says, "What's all this about?" You know. And Wolf greets the keeper of the birds very politely and in a dignified way, because, you know, that's Wolf's game, and says, "There is a boy in our village, you can probably hear him from all the way down here, who will not stop crying. He wants the singing birds, the summer birds. Would you mind if we just borrow these for a while? We'll bring them back next winter, of course." And the old man, the keeper of the birds, said, "No, no, 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 that will not do at all. You see, it is my job to keep the summer birds here all winter. Besides, my wife really likes to hear them sing, and she would not like me at all giving them away." Now, this old man's wife, you need to know, was a big, old, ugly sucker fish. And at the mention of her name, she just plopped up to the surface of the lake, grinned a toothy, fishy grin, and then submerged herself again. Odd moment, that. And Wolf said, but come on, that's a little bit selfish, don't you think? I mean, aren't you being kept up all night by the boys crying? "Well, yes, sirree, I am," said the old keeper of the birds. "But you heard me, Longnose. The birds are staying here." Right you are," said Wolf. Now, meanwhile, Otter had a bit of a cunning plan up his furry, moist sleeve. He had just plopped quietly into the water and was just pushing a big old fallen tree trunk past the island with all its branches sticking up, looking for all the world like antlers. And it just moved slowly past the keeper of the birds' hut, and he spied this and thought it was, of course, some moose crossing the river, and he said, "How yeehaw, moose meat for supper." And he got into his canoe and started paddling after Otter and his antlered branch with his bow and arrow in his canoe. Now, the animals, seeing their chance, quickly set about getting those birch bark baskets into their canoe, one after the other, so they could take the birds back up north. However, they were spotted in this little act of thievery by the keeper of the birds' wife, that fish, and she called out to her husband, "Husband, husband, they're stealing the birds!" Now, realising that he had been tricked, the keeper of the birds turned his canoe around and got out his bow and arrow and started firing arrows at the animals that were getting away with his summer birds. And they were hitting dunk, 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 dunk into the side of the canoe. Some were going into the water, some were going over their heads. Now, Muskrat, being the coward that he is, didn't want to get hit by the arrows, so he leapt into the water. And the old man, he paddled right up to him and tried to drown him with an oar, right? But then Muskrat was going... But then, you know, he realised that he actually lives in the water, so he's going to be all right. And he said to the old man, "You can't drown me down here, old man. I live in the water, okay? So you can't drown me in the water." Now, the old man realised this and became very, very annoyed, but the animals at this point were escaping. They were getting further and further away upriver with the summer birds. But that old man's wife had a cunning ruse up her sleeve this time, and she just kind of rammed her husband's boat and propelled it forwards through the water. "Husband, don't let them get away with our birds," she said. Now, that canoe shot straight across the water and rammed into the other boat. And then the old man got his paddle, and so angry he was, he started thwacking the other animals. Thwack, he hit Wolf on the head. Thwack, he hit Fisher. Thwack, he hit Porcupine. But Porcupine had curled up into a ball, and the old man had got his paddle stuck on that porcupine's quills, and he couldn't get it off the porcupine. So at that point he abandoned his oar, and the animals were getting away again, and he got out his bow and arrow and he began to shoot close range now. It was dangerous, and Wolf said, do something, I'm paddling for goodness sake. But the only animal left was Fisher, and Fisher didn't really know what to do, so he did this. He leapt off his canoe onto the bank of the river and just started doing a little dance. You know how mustelids sort of do that little hoppy dance like that? Just sort of started doing that, just as a kind of distraction. And the old man looked at Fisher and looked back at Wolf and just got out one arrow, aimed it and shot it right in Fisher's ass. And Fisher leapt up in pain, leapt up all the way into the sky and became the Fisher Star. That's a star in the constellation of Ursa Major, the Big Dipper if you're in the USA, the Plough if you're in the UK. He just became one star in that constellation. If you look at the shape of the Plough, it's kind of like a fisher martin. So that's exactly where he stayed. And it was such a magical act of transformation that happens in the myth world that old man, the keeper of the summer birds, was spellbound and just stared up, looking at the constellation of the Big Dipper. And he still remains there to this day. If any of you are watching in Canada, I'm sure next to some desolate riverbank somewhere deep dark in Labrador country, you can find that old man staring up at the sky still today. It's not the end of the story though, because those animals with all the summer birds in the birchbark baskets got all the way back to the village and presented the boy with all those summer birds, and they arrived just in time for the arrival of spring, and all the birds just flew into all the branches, and it made such a wonderful sound that that boy stopped crying. And then a little robin just came and landed on his knee, and he went, ah. And then he grabbed it and ripped off its head, and he put the robin's head on his own head and ripped off its skin and wore it like a cloak, and he turned into a robin, because he was a robin trapped in human form. That's why he was crying. And then he flew up into a branch and sang the most beautiful song, and sang down to his mother and father and said, Mum, Dad, thank you for the summer birds. I'm going now. See you next year. And that's where the summer birds go in winter. So, a bit of a story of magical transformation there, and perhaps if you know someone that's not having such a good time, perhaps they're psychologically, metaphorically speaking, perhaps they're the wrong sort of animal trapped in human form. Seems like a very current topic, that one really, doesn't it? In today's modern age, in a way. Often the ancient tales are like that, I find. Yeah, so like I said, this has a very old concept in it, this story of animals and humans kind of swapping in and out of magic words, of transformation. And that sort of worldview is something I feel that the Celtic worldview, mythic worldview, and Native American worldview shares very, very closely. Probably most of the ancient world, probably, and it's something that we've sort of lost, that sort of slightly magical way of looking at the world. I don't mean naive by that, I just mean seeing the wonder and transformation in everything. I probably haven't explained that very well there, but I'm sure you know what I mean. So thank you very much for watching. I may tell a few more folk tales from Labrador and Newfoundland on this channel, because if you're from that part of the world, you probably know a lot of the European population of that part of the world is from Britain and Ireland. So there's a lot of rubbing up of Celtic and Native American folklore in that part of the world, which I think is very interesting. Thank you very much for watching. Do please like and subscribe if you like hearing myth and folklore. I'll be back soon. See you later.
Twadibaseyo Dedesha Twadibaseyo Dedesha